Fine.
Good morning, good to see you. Excited to come back.
Just so you know, Jefferson Township and Harris couldn't make it today.
Hey, Andy. How are you doing? How are you? Just
Andy,
fine.
how are you?
That's good.
So what did you say about the New
Jefferson
Harris?
Township and Pierce could not make it today.
Oh.
They had, apparently, it's too late a notice to keep them to change their schedule.
Okay.
I think we'll have closing and
Alright. They can watch it online.
Do you want a little bit bigger? I guess.
Yeah,
A bit bigger, okay.
my mom cover.
I got my glasses, now David might need.
I'm borrowing Chris's from desk.
Here, Dave.
You good? You still gonna need glasses.
Yeah, I can,
Can you see that one?
yeah, sometimes a little fuzzy, but I can see it. Okay, well, since our last meeting, you're on.
Be quieter here today than it was last time.
Yes.
You gave us a different scenario, so we're just asking you to
Walk through these?
educate.
Good. The top part is related to the possible tax increment financing district that could be created in this region, or really in this region, because we use the property tax rates. What we have on the side is just to give you a scenario in terms of what would happen for each valuation. So if it started off at $1 million, for example, the property tax rate would generate gross TIF revenues of about almost $15,000 a year. That's a million in new valuation of some sort. Now, since we don't know if the school district's involvement would be related to the TIF district, we wanted to show you some different scenarios related to that. So we said, okay, what if we could pay the school district the full amount? That would require us to pay them $8,400, and then there'll only be $6,500 left over. And again, if you recall, if we go longer than 10 years, 75% of the valuation of the TIF, we have to get the schools involved with a school district compensation agreement. And then if we said, okay, the schools wanted to be a part of this, they wanted to see this happen, and we would pay them a half of what they would normally get. Then we would, you see the next column there is the half amount that we get, and then the funds available to debt service, about $10,700 for every $1 million of valuation.
So that would be available for us to pay down.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So as the development area would grow, you'd have more folks come online, more development happen. You can see over time what may happen, I express may, in terms of what we produce from the TIF district.
So that says, okay, this improved valuation, that would be someone coming in and building,
Let's say somebody came in and said, hey, I'm going to build a $20 million new building.
okay?
You put the TIF in place,
Mhm.
and if the school districts were agreeable to 50-50 share,
Right.
you would have about $215,000 a year for improvements or debt or whatever out in that region.
Not even having a TIF yet, and Shawnda's proposed us putting on a, get the terminology right, county TIF. Do you have language or for like other communities have used to put on a county TIF?
A county TIF in this region?
Yes.
Yeah.
In this
This is an idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that comes from bond council making you that information.
Well, could you send it to Connie or
One
you send it to
question
Connie?
about putting it on for the whole county, let them know what your
The whole county.
statement.
Countywide would be a bad idea. Here's why. I mean, let's keep in mind you're freezing the value of what's being collected right now. So in any taxing district, let's say over time, if you go out 10 years, that value is frozen. And there's always going to be new needs of taxing districts as part of life. That then increases because their value is locked, what they would get. They'd have to pass even more millage to get to what they need because their value is not growing. So that's why you would want to take a look at that.
I've never even seen a county, a full county-wide TIF.
There was a commissioner out of Butler County talked about it 10 years ago, and we went through the scenario. We said, listen, here's how detrimental this would be to you if you did this, and it's all right.
All right, so I just want to make sure I understand this. All right, so we're going to say somebody's going to come in and build $20 million of new construction, and say the schools have a half. So we'll be getting $215,000 to repay.
Correct.
Okay, and down here is our debt service, so we've taken out $5 million, which is, I believe, the price tag we're at now. So our annual repayment would be $315. There would be $215 that would be paid. So then the $135,000 would be the difference of what we would have to pay. I mean,
Out of pocket,
Out of
away
pocket.
from these revenues. That's correct. That
Okay.
scenario was there.
okay, so I'm just making sure I know how this all works. Okay.
In that 115, remember, we also talked about a combination between a JED and a sales tax revenue sharing agreement.
Okay,
So then the balance could be covered by one of the other conduits that we.
Okay, and here's the JED part down here.
Right.
All right.
So we went through and said, all right, what would happen if, again, the first 10 jobs came in at $50,000 a job, and what that may be out there. And then depending on who the JED would be partnered with, you can go up to their max of your partner, and you could also go less. So if you have a partner, the township and the community out that way, it was a 2%, you could do less. But we just said, okay, 1, 1.5, 2, what would that produce in annual revenues to the partners? Now, they kind of have a revenue sharing agreement. And there's a collection fee for whoever the municipality is.
Okay, so the JED would be township and the village. And so we would agree that of this $10,000,
Say 10 employees.
the 10 employees of this $10,000, we would get a certain percentage to help pay down this.
Yes, that would be an ideal arrangement. That would be something
Okay.
ideal for the project.
Okay, so, I mean, it would have to produce quite a few jobs to make up the difference between the 215, going with our $20 million new construction. I mean, it would have to produce at least 100 jobs at the 2% to make up the difference at the 350. So, I mean, am I reading that right? I'm just trying to clarify that I'm reading it right.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, all right. So, okay. All right. But if this doesn't happen, this is our debt.
That's worst case.
And I guess I'll be the negative Nelly because that's the way I plan my own budget, that I'm going to be paying the bill.
Right.
So if none of this happens, we still have this $350,000 annual repayment on
But you
$5 million.
can retro, when the TIF kicks in, you'll get, when the project does come, you still get the revenues. It just may be 2 year, say it takes a year, you still get that revenue. You will get paid back. You just may have to cover it until it comes in.
Right. So there's no issue with creating these TIFs. I mean, it's there in place if someone comes along, and it's
Well, the only issue is, you want to make sure you kind of time it right, because once you, depending on how you structure the resolution, that clock starts ticking for 30 years.
Okay.
30 years, so you just
Right.
want to
Right, you would want
be
something.
careful about,
Okay.
where you put in place that
Okay. All right.
strategically.
Right, because you don't want to lock yourself in.
Right.
Or,
Yeah, but the other thing is too,
They
you want
expire
to keep
too
your,
soon.
right, I mean, you want to keep your ear to the ground as well when it happens up in Columbus, because, they've traditionally sometimes using that hot seat comes in and messes with TIF sometimes, and they don't like it or whatever. And it seems like that's stopped for the last 4 years, but it's always a possibility.
okay.
At what point during a project do you do the TIF? I mean, well before a company starts the build, what point does it stop then? The building?
When you would start it,
Well, or when it's too late?
it's too late when they put that shovel in the ground.
That's my point, okay.
Yeah, that's, and you'll get different opinions from different bond counsel, but when it comes to the private improvements, let's say a $20 million building comes in, you need to be careful when the TIF's put in place. So you really want to do it before they start construction. But the value goes back to one of that year. So you're going to pick it up, even if you don't get out there right away before land transfers or whatever. In the rare case of an update or a reappraisal, you're done. Because they'll come through mid-year and you'll miss that value. Sure. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
But we're also looking at, I'm going to say small amount of debt, and say that respectively in comparison to other projects that I've seen. And use of TIF district is that if you do a 30-year window, you may pass a resolution. If we go 1 or 2 years without something, to me, I'm okay with that. Because I don't see it taking 30 years to pay off that debt.
Well, but that land is sat there for how long and nothing's happened?
Because there's no infrastructure there.
Right, well, but, I know it's the apple, it's the whole chicken-egg thing. It always comes back to the chicken-egg thing.
But we do have a project, remember, we do have a project in hand.
Like the go line. No. There's another?
Yeah, we did a 5-acre.
Oh, the 5 acre.
last year. That has not broke ground yet, they're willing to work with us, so.
But we could create the TIF for them.
No, you want to create it in the district, and they would be the first project in the
But I meant,
district.
that's
And that
right, that's what I
revenue
meant.
from that point on, because they haven't done anything to the property yet.
Right.
As soon as they do anything to the property, it's when those values increase. So we have one in hand, so you're going to have instantly some payment back
Well,
into the TIF if you created it in that district. You need to create the district, anybody in that district
okay.
produces funds for the TIF repayment.
But that's, is that related to the infrastructure, the 5 million? I mean, are these tied together that in order for this new 5-acre thing?
No, they bought the property, they just haven't broken ground.
Are they waiting for infrastructure?
They're not waiting for infrastructure, no. This one's not waiting on infrastructure, but they have not
So
broken
we
ground.
create the TIF.
But the TIF, it would still count towards the TIF, whether they
Right.
were bearing on infrastructure or not, so it's good.
Right.
Yeah. And they're not waiting, but it's still with a bird in hand. And then we're also, in that same district, we need to form that transportation improvement district, but then is it additional funds for some of the construction that would have to go in there too, that will reduce some cost. And again, that one project is helping thwart all of that forward.
You said that over the past 4 years, they haven't messed with the TIFs.
Yeah.
Once the TIF's in place, they can't go back and change anything in that TIF, can they?
They shouldn't be allowed to. Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen that. And keep in mind that there's an awful lot of TIF districts across the state of Ohio that are tied to debt. So if the legislature would try that, they would have lawsuits.
That's what I assumed.
High-powered monitoring, yeah.
That's what I assumed. I just wanted
Yeah.
your opinion on that.
Now, they could try to do other things like, related to taxation, but they're typically grandfathered.
They could abate the real property, they could almost abate the real property and do some sort of refunding structure with the company. You could still get to this process in a roundabout way. It would just be horrible for the company. And I don't think Ohio's in a surplus. They're doing great. I would not be smart if anybody come in and try to restructure that for Ohio right now.
I guess my point is, if you had debt out there, it would be very hard for them to come in and mess with your funding source.
Every entity in the state of Ohio, there's probably hundreds or if not thousands that have this in place would probably go ballistic. Really go ballistic. Andy, you've probably been with other small villages or small counties that have been right in our shoes before. Can you give us any ideas or ways that they were able to do a project like this? Because obviously the difference is, I hear Shawnda saying it's very small in the realm of, in her world, but in our world,
It's a big chunk of money.
over several years.
You guys haven't missed a whole lot of debt lately, and that's a big number.
Right, when we get a project, now you came in here half a year ago and talked about a project that liked the site up there and everything, big project.
Big project.
That would be a no-brainer tomorrow if
It was
we
300 jobs, if you remember right. That was on our motor home, it was
That
300 jobs.
would be a no-brainer instantly, but the problem is just like Denise said, is between, pulling the trigger
Yeah.
and when the first company comes.
Yeah.
So can you give us any ideas on
Well,
what some things?
I this right away, worst case scenario, without a doubt. And then we're also looking at worst case of assuming you get 0 grant money.
Right.
And you get 0 low interest rate loans, which is still a possibility. So that's the way we approach it with all of our communities, whether big or small, ones, you can look at worst case scenario. If you don't get those things, the other option is to not lay out, put yourself in debt right away in terms of fixed rate bonds. And the county's done this before with 1-year notes. That gives you some flexibility where, you can go 5 years without paying the principal down. But when you get to that 5th year, or that 5th renewal, you got to start paying it down in chunks as if it was in 20-year bonds. So that's the other way that we try to offset, the development cycle, especially with TIFs, because there's very rare when you go right to bonds right away, unless you've got a mature TIF district that's producing revenue, we can say, yeah, we know that's there, we're comfortable with that.
Right.
So that's the other way that they've kind of offset some of the risk. I know it's a lot of debate, there's a lot of discussion with these, especially a lot of communities like Preble County, when they did their first TIF up there, it was like the world come to an end. But it's worked out okay. But it's just a matter of making sure you look at this worst case scenario so you know what's going on.
And you're talking about the Honda plant up there?
No, actually, it was for a retail. So the city put it in place for a retail strip. Is it 33 comes up there? There's a retail complex in there that was developed and the city used it to actually to help pay for the infrastructure improvements. And there was a lot of debate about, you're taking money from some of the special service entities and so on and so forth in the school district. But, in that scenario, you look at it, if we're at retailers that were in the county before, that they were consistently going down to Dublin and stuff like that. So it wasn't offset, but I just think that, I can't stress it enough that when we look at this, I think your goal is not to let it come out of general fund, correct?
Right.
And that's why if we can also phase in chunks of what's needed in terms of infrastructure improvements, that will help you as well. So, maybe it's not the full 5, you can split it up in 2 and do a little bit at a time. I don't know the details of the development, but that's another way to mitigate some of your risk.
Remember too, the city of Eaton, the Walmart is in a TIF district and it's coming near its end. So all those improvements that were paid by that TIF district are getting ready to flood back into the community. It was a very good TIF district. We had that at the Brooker and Eckler seminar that I held in my office. The city of Eaton explained how they did their TIF district, so that's an example that you can look at. I also have a book that shows some other TIF districts in other counties that you could look at if you just wanted to see some examples of some language that I can share with you. But remember, the city of Eaton did one, and they offered to help us in any way in terms of developing the TIF.
Was it 10 years?
It was 10 years.
What was it?
And National Trail
It was 10 years.
is where this TIF district will be, and they are on board with.
They were here, remember when I gave?
I remember,
right?
but they're on board with us putting this TIF district and then they're going to share their.
It's uncommon when they do it all, I mean, that's just part of the thing. I mean, if they want more rooftops, if they want more people in the existing rooftops, they want more kids in the seats, they look at it that way. They were here, they were supportive of the project. They've been involved with the brainstorming sessions all along, so they understand.
Well, I'm just taking a baby step with the TIF.
Yeah. I mean, they understand TIF.
I don't like
We
this
talked
part
about
right
it,
here.
Yeah.
The red part.
Yeah, well, they understand what TIF district is, so it's negotiating. It's the same with the CRA, it's the same with personal properties. It's the same scenario, they have to sign off, but it's just, they're familiar with it. It's not an anomaly. So they've been involved since they long time.
My suggestion, and folks may not like this, but it seems that, what I'm gathering, it seems that this is a more of a real community kind of group effort to do something with. If that's the case, our suggestion would be to have the school district enter into an agreement that is more, that would catch them up in later years if there's excess revenues coming in, but yet that service gets paid first. I mean, if you're going to go out and issue the debt, I think, the approach is to them, listen, we're willing to take on this risk if you do, but the revenues flow first to debt, and then after that, we'll pay the school district what's left, and then if there's a deficiency over time, we'll calculate that and pay it back.
So would it be out of the ordinary to that the township and the village do their own bonding, and then we do our bonding to work toward this?
They could if they can get financing. Yeah, that's, it depends who's controlling the TIF.
Right.
So, I mean, you can have, at the end of the day, whether it's a port authority or whoever's issuing it, they're not, whoever's going to give you the financing is going to look and say, who's on the hook?
Right.
And look at their financial strength. I don't know anything about the township and the village, but.
Well, let's just say they're in great shape.
Yeah, they could, I mean, that's typically how they're really done is local, but
Because that would be, that would spread the burden and the risk.
except for they are planning to do a JED. So they're already involved in it in a different way. So there's a million different ways that the project could be funded. There's multiple different ways that we could finance the project. Multiple different people involved in it that could service the debt. In the time, I believe the township and the village, when I originally approached them to say, hey, if you guys really want development up here, these are the things that we got to look at. Can you do it? And my opinion, and I think they spoke it here, was that they did not feel they could independently do a TIF district, but they could do a JED. That's why the village instituted the payroll tax.
So maybe say that we would do what you just suggested with the school district of having the payment elevate,
Yeah.
certainly ran across other school districts. I mean, school districts are having hard times themselves.
Right.
So what happens if a school district has a really hard time? Who's that falls back on us?
Well, I mean, it's not a guarantee. I mean, so, some school districts have looked at it and says, hey, we're getting $10,000 off that property right now. And they just don't give you a blank check. It's in the agreement, it says, okay, these are the public improvements that you're going to go get financing for that we're behind. So that's paid first, we agree what that number is, and then we look at projections that say, hey, if things pan out, this is what you'll get caught back up to over time. So, I mean, it's not as if you're taking something away from them right now, and you're not guaranteeing them,
Future,
that something's going to happen. But I think, from what I've heard, it's if you don't put that first shovel in the ground and do something, nothing will ever happen there, if that's the general consensus here. But, so they're not hurt financially in terms of what they're already getting. There could be upside in terms of if the development happens.
I think
Does that answer your question? Or
Connie's question was, if we enter into an agreement
yeah,
that they're paid on the back end,
right.
they get in dire straits, they could not come back to the county and say, we need that
but you know where they will go?
$75,000.
To the taxpayers for a levy.
Understand that, but
But you can revise the agreement too. I mean, you could do a revision to the agreement if we had surplus or there was, if the county was okay.
Well, the agreement, the surplus will be taken care of in the agreement. In that scenario that they said, hey, pay debt service first, they would get any surplus. That's how that would work. And then if there was still a delinquency, it would continue to catch them up in the future years. Now, to the argument of we're in bad shape, the TIF caused it, The TIF didn't cause it.
Right, it wouldn't cost
Because-
it, no.
Yeah.
Had you not put the shovel in the ground and done these improvements, there'd be no value out there.
Right, exactly.
And that was my point. They're starting here,
Yeah.
hoping to get to here, but just because we've been flatlined, there's not a whole, I mean, we're all in the same boat, and
Exactly.
her point was they couldn't come to the county and say, we need a lump sum of X.
Unless you wanted to do that. But, I mean, you know, again, then there's only so many revenues in the pie.
Right.
The key to them is making sure that the collective group is agreeing to, hey, the number's $3 million. Go borrow $3 million, and we'll be behind that. What they don't want to have happen is you continue to add 3, now it's 5, and then 4 years later, it's another 2.
Still creep.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to make sure that you have to go back, and it's only fair, that you go back and have to get their agreement if anything, say Chrysler plant comes in out there, and then, then you have to go back and talk to the district again about, hey, let's revise the agreement. That's how that typically works.
That's called a rolling TIF. So if you had to go back and revise it for some reason and add additional infrastructure to it and increase the debt, then you have to go back to the schools for
Their approval, because they're partnering in the whole thing.
That's correct.
All the players would have to agree to any
Absolutely.
modifications, bottom line, and
And it starts with you if you're the entity putting the TIF in place.
Andy, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
thanks,
Do you have any additional questions?
I don't think so. I just want to verify the TIF in place, other than the time, the clock running out and us starting it,
Yeah.
it won't, it's not a detriment to us to do that. It is not just having that in place, outside of the bonding, just having that in place, there's nothing that is, for the school district, for anyone, there's no detriment to putting that in place.
The only thing the detriment is probably you're spending money on legal fees.
Okay, and
That's,
is that a lot? What's your lawyers these days?
I know that it's not, I don't think it's acceptable.
Okay, so it's probably not.
What you're asking is if the TIF's in place, is it detrimental? No, because everybody has to agree to it before you enter into it.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
everything's in place, but if everybody does not agree, it goes nowhere.
Okay,
And let's talk about the steps, because it takes a while
Yeah.
to get this in place. I mean, the school districts have, once you decide if it's you putting the TIF in place, you have to give them 45 days. So they could sit on that for 45 days if they wanted to. Typically, they waive the 45 days, and it would start with you passing a resolution subject to a compensation agreement with the school district. So you would then sit down with them and talk about what your plans are, what you're thinking, what your first offer would be in terms of the project. And I would think you probably want all the players there in the township and the village at the same time. But from start to finish, it's going to be maybe 4 to 5 months.
So 6 months probably a fast track.
But it's not going to hurt to start through that
With
process at least.
multiple entities.
With the additional information.
Especially when you start getting into after the JED too is going to take some time. I'm sure
Multiple entities, it's common, getting everybody to a common meeting time and things, so 6 months is not out of question.
I would think that before you go forward with the TIF, we want to see the JED in place as well. And then after that, then you've got, if you issue any debt, you know what's going on there, then you've got joint funding agreements.
so those things would be in place if a developer or if a company came to us and said, hey, we really like this area. Those things are already in place, and then
That would be positive, yeah.
that would be good. Okay.
But you would be, if you would ever go down this path, you would be the one that's
Holding our hands?
We'd like to, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of these, I've seen a couple of them go bad because
Yeah.
committees didn't listen. There's one down in Fairfield Township, just right down the street from my house, that we told them not to do. And they did it.
Right.
And it's still sitting there, and in that case, the developer had to pay out of pocket through different situation here, because you don't have a developer on the front end.
Right.
There was a developer saying, I'm gonna do all this residential, and I'm gonna bring in a Meyer, and a Meyer never came. So it's just a matter of making sure you're careful about where you step next. And, Abbott, been working with you guys for a long time. Brenda Weimer in his office, I'm not sure if you've met Brenda before. She does all the TIF work. Yeah, she does a really good job.
And we are talking to the Warren County Port Authority.
Okay.
So, just so you know that.
Good.
Okay, thank you. I have more information.
Well, I'm sure you'll be available if we have any additional questions
No problem.
anytime, so.
As long as I also 7-3 down anymore, I could on the back roads.
Okay.
You hit it 13 country?
Yeah, it was all right. I never had 1.2.
It's a scenic route.
All right. Well, you had a nice drive on a beautiful day, right?
It was, right.